Good morning, everyone, and welcome to your next um, session. I'm sorry, welcome to your next session. And we're here with Jared Jones, who is a Care to Change counselor. Jared works as a mental health counselor, specializing in teens and adults who struggle with anxiety, depression, suicide, trauma, and other related mental health challenges. He enjoys helping parents learn how to promote adaptive skills for managing emotion with their kids and teens. So please welcome him. And I think this is going to be a lot of great information that he's going to share with us. Thanks, Jared.
Thank you so much, Sandra. Yeah, good morning, everyone. So before we get started, I want to share a little bit about myself, just a little bit of my background. So Sandra shared kind of what my current work is and what I do, but my master's degree is in mental health counseling, and I work as a mental health counselor. But my bachelor's degree is actually in brain and behavior sciences. So before I became a counselor, I was actually educated a lot on the neuroscience of how the brain works. And I think that it's really important for us to know that neuroscience and the underpinnings of that when we're understanding, how do we interact with teens? How do we help with emotional regulation? Because the more you understand how the brain works, the more you're going to understand what's going to be helpful and what's not going to be helpful. So that's what we're going to start with today. We're going to bring up the slides for the presentation. So we're going to be talking about how to help teens think for themselves. We're going to start off with a little bit of brain science and kind of understanding what's a teen brain going through in their years here. What's being developed and how are we going to help the teens promote that development as they go along. Okay, we're going to hold questions until the end. So if you have any questions, hang on to stuff and we'll have some time at the end if you need me to elaborate on anything or have any further questions. All right. So generally, we'll go over some brain development, talk about the window of tolerance and how to help teens gain that tolerance, 10 things to keep in mind when trying to build emotional skills in teens, practical strategies that you can do to help, and some resources that I think would be helpful for us when we're trying to help out our teens and build their emotional regulation skills. So the first question I want to pose for you guys, and just to think about this for a minute, is by what age does the brain reach full size, do you think? Like what age do you feel like the brain is fully grown? And then by what age do you feel that the brain is fully developed? There's a difference between being grown and developed. Grown, I usually describe as that's when all the pieces are there, all the intricate parts are present in the brain. All the neurons are there, and basically everything's ready to go, but it's not quite wired up yet. Whereas fully developed is everything's connected, the brain's working at its optimal pace as it's supposed to, or as we generally feel like an adult brain works. So the answer might surprise you, or some of you may know this already. So for the teen brain, the average age that the brain reaches its full size, so it's got all the components, all the neurons and stuff are built, is around age 11 for girls and around age 13 or 14 for boys. So by the time they begin to enter adolescence into their teenage years, all the pieces of their brain that they need to function as an adult are present. The brain's done growing. They've gotten through the childhood stage. However, that doesn't mean it's fully developed. What age is it fully developed and matured to kind of that adult level of functioning is actually in your mid to late 20s. So we have about like a 10 plus year span where the pieces of the brain are present. The teen or child is fully capable of being able to function with adult level of functioning, but it's not quite there, like developed to where they're going to be at that level. They're able to have that rational thought. They're able to think through decisions, but that's not how their brain is actually functioning in the moment. And so we're trying to teach them and develop them to get to that level that by the time they reach their mid to late 20s, or sometimes their early 20s, that development has been fully gone through the course of that. And we can see them functioning in an appropriate and adaptive way. Now, I'm about to run through some brain science real quick. Some of you might have a brain science background, some of you might not. So I'm going to do just a general overview as much as I can. It's not going to be an exactness. There's going to be some things that I'm just going to be able to barely touch on because the brain is so complex. It's hard to get into all this stuff while just presenting a little bit. So if you are curious about that or want to hear more about brain science, I can point you to some directions at the end of the presentation. Okay, so here's a diagram of the human brain, just some basic anatomy of the human brain. We got the cerebellum and the brainstem. So this is the lower part of your brain, and that functions a lot with like motor functioning, coordination, your basic living instincts like breathing, hunger, heart rate, stuff like that. That's all controlled by this lower part of the brain. And that's not really what we're going to focus on today. Today, we're going to talk about two parts. The first one is going to be the frontal lobe, which is specifically the prefrontal cortex. So this is the part of the brain that's like behind your forehead and behind your eyes. And this part of the brain has been shown to be heavily involved in rational thought, problem solving. This is the part of the brain that is fully developed as a functioning adult. But this is the last part of the brain that really gets wired up and connected well when we're developing into adults. And even though it's there and it's present and it can function by the end of childhood, that doesn't mean that it's the one that's fully in charge or it's fully wired up with the rest of the brain through our adolescent years. So we're going to come back to focus on this and how to develop that connection to keep the frontal lobe and that prefrontal cortex especially in charge. Then if you slice the brain in half, this is what a midsection of the brain would look like. And in the middle part here, kind of in the center of the brain, between the two hemispheres, or kind of right there on the inside of the brain, we have the limbic system. And sometimes it's referred to the midbrain structures. So this is the part of our brain that really is in control of emotions, of impulses, or I should say is involved in emotions and impulses. Basically, whenever we have a certain desire, or we have something that we're motivated to do, whether that be from a craving from my body, when my body's telling me something, I feel hungry. So the limbic system helps me to understand that feeling. I begin to experience that emotion. And my limbic system motivates me to do behavior out of that impulse. So I feel hungry. So my desire is, oh, I'm going to go get something to eat. However, the limbic system isn't always like, as it's involved in that emotional process, and we'll look at the difference between emotional processing in the brain versus rational processing in the brain. It's not always thinking through what's the best decision or what's the right decision. And so this limbic system, again, fully online in teens, but the limbic system tends to have more control because the executive cortex, the frontal lobe, the prefrontal cortex we talked about, that part that's supposed to be in charge and has rational thought and thinks through decisions, isn't quite communicating with the limbic system until late teen years. So they're constantly being developed together. So when you look at this diagram, when the brain develops, and a majority of the development is in like the womb, and then when they get born into the childhood, it'll continue to develop, but the development happens from back to front, or sometimes from bottom to top. So the basic parts of your brainstem, your cerebellum, and some of your limbic system, that's going to develop first. That's going to become online and kind of get to that more mature level of how your brain responds to impulses, to emotions, things like that, before that frontal part of your brain. So that's why when we're in our teenage years, you tend to see that frontal lobe functioning is not quite as matured as the rest of it, because that's how it's developing, is from back to front. So we're teaching teens how to develop their brain to get that frontal part online. Okay, so let's look at the difference between thinking brain and feeling brain right now. And this is just something that they used to say, your left brain or right brain, that was a whole science. And that's been pretty much debunked. It's not truly the hemispheres of your brain. There is a little bit more of like creativity and emotional processing that happens in your right lobe, and a little bit more of like rational thought and thinking through of impulse control and things on the left side of the brain. But it's not an exact hemisphere to hemisphere. Really what happens is the brain processes things in two different ways. So the first way that the brain processes information is what I call the thinking brain. And the thinking brain is that rational piece that it has a lot of that executive part involved. It basically works in a logical way. It takes information, it breaks it down logically and rationally, and then from that information, it makes decisions, or it makes rational outcomes. It operates by reason, it uses facts and data and information on it, and it's got what's called explicit memory. And explicit memory is like the stuff that we can easily recall. Like, what did I eat for lunch yesterday? Well, I can remember, I can go back and picture myself eating my lunch yesterday, maybe remembering what it tasted like, or remembering how it smelled, or just kind of thinking of the facts or data of that. The thinking brain process, because it breaks down information into such little pieces, is slower. It is much slower of a process on it. Whereas you have the feeling brain, the way that our brain processes emotionally. And this one is more instinctive and experiential. So this is the part of the brain that whenever we have an experience, it just reacts to it. It's kind of automatic. It operates by perception, so it just connects certain sensations or experiences we have to emotional states. It's not necessarily disseminating specific information. It's just making connections between it. So it learns by association. This is the part of the brain that, if you've heard of like the Pavlov experiment where he made the ringing of the bell connect to the salivation, like that basic behavioral skills. This is the part of the brain that process actually happens in. It's more implicit memory, so this isn't necessarily stuff that we recall very easily. You sort of think of like the muscle memory processes, like how to ride a bike. You don't get on a bike and think, oh, I need to put my feet on the pedals. Oh, I need to put my bottom on the seat. I need to hold the handlebars a certain way. I need to make sure I keep my balance. If you've ridden a bike enough, you just get on and go. You just tell yourself to go. You don't really have to think about it. And so that's how that feeling brain works. And because it's more of those direct connections, it's faster. It works a lot more instinctively. This is our kind of knee-jerk responses. So when we're in an emotional state, we're behaving in this a lot faster than our thinking brain can respond rationally. All right. So what's going on in a teen's brain? Back to our cross section here. So like I said, the thinking brain is online but not in charge. And that thinking brain has a lot of processing centered in that prefrontal cortex. So it's available, but that doesn't mean that it's always going to be the one calling the shots. Teens' brains, their thoughts are going to dwell on impulses. They're experiencing all of these sensations, physical stuff coming in from their body, urges that they're having from their environment. And that's really where a lot of their processing is going to come from. What am I feeling in the moment, and how am I going to respond to that feeling? I'm going to kind of respond in a way that I feel like I should be doing in that moment. Now, the thinking brain, or that prefrontal cortex, can be online, and in some teens, it's actually working really well, and they can balance that well. But that doesn't mean that they're free from those impulses overcoming that front part of the brain. So these two, the thinking brain, the feeling brain, or the frontal cortex and the limbic system, aren't necessarily communicating on good terms. They're not always seeing things eye to eye. And so what will happen is when one of them overpowers the other, it can create a lot of distress. And so we might be making decisions, or teens will be making decisions that might not have both in mind. It might not be thinking through the decision. We might dwell on impulse and just do it out of impulse and then not really know why we did that behavior. Or if we have a strong enough thinking brain process, we might be doing something that we know is right, but we feel it's wrong. And we have a lot of distress because we're doing something because we know that we should be doing it. But we don't really feel that. We don't have a way to outlet those emotions. And when those two parts of the brain aren't communicating correctly, it can cause a lot of distress and a lot of different behavioral responses. All right. So if you think about it, so let's say sensation comes in through the five senses. How's the brain going to process this? So it's got stimulation coming in, and this stimulation is going to run through the limbic system first because it's faster. If there's any kind of emotional connection or impulse connection with what's coming into the five senses, like let's say I smell cookies sitting on the counter in the kitchen, and they're my favorite cookies. I take that information with my five senses. My limbic system says, go eat one, because I'm hungry and I want that cookie. It's associated with a positive emotional state. But my thinking brain might tell me, like, I shouldn't have this. It's almost dinner time. These cookies are for something else. It's got to create that balance. And you also have teens developing that brain-body connection. So this is how they're understanding what physical states of their body, what sensations are going on in their body mean to them. Sometimes they may have a stomach ache and they don't know, what does a stomach ache mean? Is it because I ate something weird? Is it because I'm tired? I didn't get enough sleep last night? Is it because I'm hungry and I need to eat something? Is it because I'm anxious? They're learning all of these states for the first time. And so as their body has more and more complex experiences or sensations that they've never felt before, they have to interpret that in their brain. And so they have to be careful about learning, okay, what does this mean? How do I put words to this? And how do I understand this when it comes to what I take in from my five senses? And then after it gets processed in the limbic system, that's when it gets caught up with the prefrontal cortex, and it begins to break down the information and understand, okay, my stomach hurts because, well, I didn't eat breakfast this morning and I only got about 5 hours of sleep. So it's probably a combination of lack of sleep in that, or, oh, I have a test in like sixth period today. Like, of course I'm feeling anxious and it's making my stomach hurt, but that process happens later. So we want to try to promote that connection with teens. So let's talk about window of tolerance. When it comes to being able to work through emotions, you always have to help teens understand what their window of tolerance is. So what I mean by this, and a lot of this comes from, I think, a presentation we've done on TBRI. But basically, when our nervous system throughout the day, it's going to have different sensations, different experiences that are going to cause more activation or less activation of our nervous system. And generally speaking, that's going to stay between the normal bounds of activation. So you'll see in this chart here, we have the accelerator. So that's our sympathetic nervous system. When something engages us, when we feel stress, whether that be negative stress, like, oh my gosh, I have to do a task that I don't want to do, or positive stress, like my friends are saying, hey, let's go out and ride bikes around the neighborhood. And I have to get myself up and go to the garage, get on my bike. Like there's a lot of positive and negative things that can create that activation. And so that begins to engage my nervous system. And when my nervous system is engaged, it's actually draining energy from it. And then you have the brake system, the parasympathetic nervous system, that when I'm done expending energy, my nervous system is calming down. This is when maybe I'm sitting down and reading a book on the couch, or just going down and laying down, taking a quick nap for a little while, or going for a walk and taking some deep breaths. That's calming my nervous system down to be at a lower energy state. Normally, we're supposed to stay within these bounds of these up and downs with different energy states and have this nice balance through it. But the world is not as it's supposed to be, and our nervous system is not put through a normal cycle like this. Typically, a teen's activation and deactivation is going to look something more like this darker red line that you see here. There's stressful events, there's things that are meaningful to them that will send them way high above where they need to be with their activation. And then maybe there's something else that happens, or different things that they think about that send them way low in their activation. And so they're going back and forth between these energy states. And when they break those lines through the windows of tolerance, then that's going to put them in enough of an energy state that their limbic system is going to take over. It puts them in fight or flight mode, and then they're no longer able to help break themselves or help to slow themselves down or know how to manage their emotions. Their brain is going to go into that self-protection mode, and they're going to do what they think is immediately best right then and there to help them. And so without knowing about this window of tolerance and how to be able to know when I'm at a high energy state versus a low energy state, what I need to do to help with my energy state, and how to bring myself back into that window, it's going to be hard for any teen to be able to be taught or make the right decisions in that time. So this is kind of where the different stages are, what different things you can observe depending on where they are at in their energy stage. So you see like the reds at top line. So that's their highest stage of energy. This can be at the peak stress moments, maybe not quite overwhelming moment, but you can just tell that they're really stressed. And then you have yellow, which is like a more engaged, like they're challenged, they're working through something. You can tell that their mind is busy on something. You have the green, which is kind of more the normal range, and the blue, which is that lower level. And I have a chart here that kind of talks about what you'll see at those different levels. So of course, the blue, low energy. This is some of the observations that you can see when they're at that low level. These could be signs of, them being tired, but these could also be signs of they've been at such a high energy state for a while that now they're crashing and they're at that low energy state because their nervous system is just overwhelmed. It's overtired, and now they've been brought back down. Of course, your green is like that normal place where you want to be, that calm, cooperative. This is the social range. So if the teen you're working with isn't in that green range, they're not going to have a lot of good social behavior. They're not going to be able to learn very well because they're not at this level of activation that's actually conductive to that. And then you have your yellow, your energy levels beginning to escalate. You start to see some of those signs of distress, some of those extra things, acting out in certain ways. And then, of course, you got your red stage, which is telling you you're getting close to that overwhelm point. You start seeing a lot of these other behaviors and things that really, it's like, I know you and you're not like this. Why are you acting this way? Well, because they're probably at that high energy state and getting close to being outside of their window of tolerance. Okay. It is impossible to teach a teen to regulate their emotions without first regulating your own. So the best way to be able to teach a teen how to help with their emotions is for you to learn how to regulate your window of tolerance. A lot of times I work with parents where, a teen gets outside of that window of tolerance, they become very reactive, or they shut down and they just don't do anything. And then a parent begins to react to that teen. Like, why aren't you listening to me? Why are you acting this way? And all of a sudden the parent's outside of that window of tolerance. And if a parent is doing that, or, an adult that they're with, then that's not going to help regulate them. That's not going to teach them that you're feeling outside of your window of tolerance right now. You're not back at your calm state. And you really need to show them like, okay, this is how you're feeling right now. Looks like we need to either hit the gas pedal or the brake pedal to try and get you back to that calm zone. Here's how we can do this. But they can't do that unless the adult that they're interacting with can do that themselves. If they can see that an adult is showing them that, is teaching them that, and modeling that for them, then they'll be able to gain that skill to know that for themselves. So being aware of the window of tolerance, being able to show that you're able to recognize where you're at in your nervous system energy level, and teaching that to teens is a great way for them to be able to learn and to regulate their emotions by themselves. All right, so 10 things to keep in mind. So these are important points. I'm going to run through these pretty quickly, but if anyone is curious about these, we can talk more about them later. First one, teens aren't always trying to push your buttons. Sometimes they're just emotionally dysregulated and their limbic system is in control of their brain right then. And what they're doing in that moment isn't like a thoughtful reflection of what they're wanting to do. They're just reacting emotionally. And so they might not be intentionally trying to do things that is trying to get at you. Now, sometimes they are. On occasion, some teens are actually trying to push buttons because they're trying to break boundaries, and discipline's necessary in some cases. But don't just assume that a teen's trying to push your buttons because they're acting that way. It's better to assume that they're outside of their window of tolerance, or they're at an energy state that's not effective for them to think through their decisions and actually bring that prefrontal cortex online. Second, teens think about what's going to happen next, but not always rationally. Our brains are predictive. Our brains are trying to guess what's going to happen next so I can prepare for that next thing. It's a survival instinct. If I know what's going to happen in the next hour, in the next few hours, in the next day, in the next week, then I can be more prepared to face those challenges. And teens think irrationally a lot. They think about worst case scenarios. They think about how things are going to work out poorly. And so if you're helping your teen to be able to adaptively and appropriately predict what's going to happen next and what the next thing is and what they can expect from that, that will help them not get too overwhelmed by expecting something tragic or horrible happening next. And so you help their predictive brain be able to make better guesses as they get through new experiences in their life. And then number 3, even if the situation doesn't seem good or bad, it matters how they think and feel about it. So what might be a minor thing to you might be a major thing to your teen. You know, maybe they have a friend who's upset with them, and that's like really throwing them off and dysregulating them. If that's happening, you want to be there for your teen, and you want to help listen to them at their level, empathize with them, connect with them. You know, it sounds like that this is a really distressing event for you. Man, I'm really sorry you're going through this. How can we work through this together? Don't invalidate or dismiss things just because they seem small. I mean, we all look back and think like, oh yeah, that you're going to be over this in a week. Like this will be gone. You'll be on the other side of this. But in the moment, they need you to connect with them more. They need you to validate their feelings and help them to work through their feelings versus just dismissing them. All right. Number 4, you don't need to know exactly what led to a decision or agree with it, with the reason to be able to help. So sometimes your teens make bad calls on how to deal with feelings. And that doesn't mean that you need to like sit there and walk them through, what were you thinking? Tell me, what was your thinking process through that? Sometimes it doesn't help them, because even though you're trying to promote that thinking process, if they're emotionally dysregulated in that moment, they're not in that mindset to be taught and to learn and to implement those thinking brain changes. Their feeling brain needs help calming down. They need connection, and they need to know, especially if they made a bad decision that led to a negative consequence. Okay, you know, you're feeling bad because you got your phone taken away, because you chose to not turn in your homework, because you were feeling tired last night. Like, that's awful. Like that hurts to have your phone taken away. I know how much it means to you to be able to talk with your friends over your phone. And, you know, I'm sorry that happened. And then once you empathize with them and not try to grill them on what decision path that they made, or like tell them like, well, you should have gotten your homework done, or you should have done this. Connect with them first, and then you'll be able to implement that later when they're calmed down and they're in a lowered emotional state. Number 5, teens need to know that they are good at something and can influence the world. Empowering your teen is important. If you're not empowering them and giving them the option of choice and showing that they have involvement in what they're doing, if you're making all those choices for them or taking their power away from them, then what you're going to create is a dynamic where they're going to rely on you to make their choices for them. So empower them. Help them to find things that they're capable of. Point out when they're feeling, or when they are accomplishing things, and make good decisions. The more empowered they feel, the more capable they are of making decisions, and it strengthens that prefrontal cortex connection where they feel competent and capable of thinking through and making the right thing. 6, teens want you to listen and hear, not react and respond. I've kind of been saying that already. You know, if you're reacting to what they're saying, if you are escalating to their escalation, then that's not going to be helpful to them. And it kind of proves their point. Sometimes teens will act out just to get your reaction because that justifies their reaction more. But if you're reacting to them, you're not doing anything for them. You're showing them that it's appropriate to respond to someone being upset or in a dysregulated emotional state by you getting in a dysregulated emotional state. And then that perpetuates them, whenever you come to maybe confront them or to implement discipline or even just to try to connect with them, their emotional walls will go up, their limbic system gets triggered, they immediately get emotionally dysregulated. So what you want to do is promote an ease, a comfort of, your emotions are safe here. We're going to talk calmly and quietly. I'm going to listen to you. You're going to have a voice, and then we'll go from there as far as what we're going to talk about. Number 7, there's a direct inverse connection between learning and stress. The more stressed a teen is, the less they're going to learn. So if you have a teen in a high stress situation, that's not the time to teach them. That is not a learning opportunity. Now, with safety concerns involved in that, sometimes you do have to step in and teach a teen something if it's a real danger to them or to someone else. But if a teen is stressed, the first thing you need to worry about or focus on is, okay, you're feeling stressed. How do we get this stress down? How do we work together? Or what decisions can you make right now that's going to help you to de-stress? And when you focus on attending to the stress before attending to the correction or the lesson that you're trying to teach them, that will put them back in that lowered state, that green zone that we talked about, where learning is possible and engagement is possible. And then that's going to promote long-term learning versus a teen just doing what you say just to kind of get out of the situation. And then in that case, it's going to help them learn to teach for them or to learn to think for themselves. Number 8, self-regulation can be a major challenge for teens under stress. We talked about that. They cannot be regulated if they are under stress. So you're trying to help them to be regulated. You're trying to help them to get back in that green zone. 9, it's okay to ask the question, what do you need right now? Get them thinking of solutions. So instead of saying, go to your room and take some deep breaths, go for a walk, ask them, sit down and make an observation. You look really stressed right now. What do you need? And then work through them in that thought process. Man, I need to not do my homework right now. Okay, I hear that you're stressed from homework and that's what's causing that stress for you. How do we bring that stress down so that way we can work through getting the homework done and then it's no longer causing you stress? So you might be able to guide them in that decision-making process, but give them the power of thinking of solutions and just feed them just enough that they can make those decisions for themselves. And then finally, the 10th thing to remember is you cannot lead your kids farther than you've gone yourself. If you have not learned these skills, if you struggle with emotional dysregulation, if you force yourself to learn at times of high stress, or you feel like you have to teach yourself in every moment, that's not going to be helpful for them. They're going to model after you. They are going to take after whoever the adults are in their life that shows them those healthy strategies, or the adults that they're close to in their life. So if you need to learn some of these lessons for yourself and gain these skills, that's totally okay. It's totally fine to be able to do that. But pay attention to how far you've made on your emotional regulation journey before you expect a teen that you're working with to be able to even match you at that journey. If you're only regulating yourself by setting boundaries and you're not actually working through those emotions, then you can't expect your teen to be able to work through those emotions and be able to do stuff without having to set those specific boundaries. All right, so how do I help my team? What are some things that I can actually do to work through that? So the first one is engage. Oftentimes, our knee-jerk reaction is we need to provide a consequence to a teen's decision, whether that be good or bad, and that will reinforce their behavior. In younger kids, this might be more helpful because younger kids don't have that prefrontal cortex developed. They don't have that piece that's already present in their brain. What they need is more of that behavior correction. Whereas teens, no, you're trying to get that connection going. You're trying to help them understand that they need to be thinking things through with this part of their brain. And the first step to that is having healthy relationships. Because the more that we can interact with others, the more that we can reach out to others, especially for emotional support, the more regulation we can find. So if you have a teen who's maybe displaying a lot of emotions at the moment or is making bad decisions, the first thing you need to ask yourself is, what's my relationship like with this teen? I might be able to set boundaries with them. I might be able to modify their behavior, but what's my relationship like? Am I engaged with them? Do they feel like they can be comfortable coming to me and telling me things? Do they feel like they can tell me things without fear of consequence? Or can they feel like they can tell me things without worrying about my reaction and how I'm going to respond that's going to escalate the situation? If you can show them that you can regulate your emotions to have a civil conversation that's safe and comforting for them, then they're going to be more open to engaging with you. And then if you set that as the tone, as we're going to start with connection and how this relationship is going to be, it's a safe relationship, it's a loving relationship, then they're going to be more in that calm state to be able to hear you out and listen when you're trying to correct or teach them something. So always focus on the engagement of the relationship first. And if you have trouble with that engagement, there's strategies that you can take to help engage with your teen a little bit better. So find their interests. What's stuff that they like? What's stuff that they're into? And it may be difficult, especially in today's digital age with adults where we're not quite caught up with how far technology is going, and they engage with their friends over cell phones and all kinds of different apps that they use through computers. Their time with friends is getting on a Discord server and talking with friends through Discord, and that's their social time for the day. Okay, that's different than how we were when we were growing up. But still, understand what they enjoy, what they like, and find those times of connecting with them. You'll find it surprising, and I'm sure many of you have done this before. When you begin to connect with the teen, they begin to open up so much. And maybe they don't open up emotionally at first. Maybe their first desire is to just talk about the thing that you're doing in the moment. Like, maybe you play a video game with them and they just talk about that video game on end. What matters is that you're listening and you're engaging with them in that. You're making a relationship out of that thing that they do versus just kind of letting them have their own thing and you have your own thing. When you begin with that engagement, that sets the tone and allows you to be able to lay the foundation that's going to help with correction and helping that teen to think for themselves. The second thing is helping the brain connection. We talked about the feeling brain and the thinking brain. You want to get these two parts of their brain communicating together. That's what's going to help to make that connection where they're going to think through their decisions, control their impulses, validate their feelings. You want to get them both involved. So that looks like validating their feelings, talk about their emotions, help them to express how they're feeling. This one might be harder. I work with a lot of teen boys and they have a hard time describing their feelings. Maybe you need better ways to help them express their feelings. Maybe they need a feelings wheel. Google a feelings wheel. They're awesome tools to be able to identify emotions, but get that feeling brain engaged. And the feeling brain is not just with emotions, but with physical sensations. What are you feeling in your body right now? What's going on? I once worked with a mom who was learning some of these skills for her teen. And one of the things that would happen is her teen would come home from school, be very grumpy, be very disruptive, not wanting to talk, not wanting to engage. And she couldn't figure out what it was. Well, the teen was feeling grumpy because he was hungry every time he came home from school. But all he wanted to do was go sit on the couch and get on his phone. So what his mom started doing was encouraging him to start going and getting a snack when he came home. Go get something to eat. Here's some stuff. I bought some healthy snacks today. Why don't you have something? And put down the phone, go get something to eat, just sit at the table, get a drink of water. And then all of a sudden the behaviors go away because what the teen did was they took care of that physical sensation that was causing that emotional situation going on with them. And then all of a sudden they felt better. They were able to engage more in that. Help to teach your teen to pay attention to their emotional states so that way they can validate that. But also engaging the thinking brain too. Once they're brought down, once their emotional state is more regulated, okay, now that's the time to talk about thinking processes. So if they have something you need to talk to them about, ask them, what are your thoughts on this? How are you thinking about this? What's your process like breaking this down? Some teens might be more aware of that. They might have a thinking process through it. Some might not. And so you want to get that thinking brain engaged once you label those feelings and get the feeling brain involved. So that way they're communicating with each other. The more you communicate between the two and help them to engage in understanding and acknowledging their emotions while also following through with the right decisions and doing what's best to help with their emotions, you begin to wire those two things together. And that creates that maturing of the brain that they're going to be able to better control their impulses. And then lastly, we have recognize outcome. So nothing solidifies that brain connection more than a teen reflecting over that decision, going back over and thinking over it again. And the best way to get a teen to do that is to recognize what you see them doing. So you've connected with them, you've helped them to engage their thinking and feeling brain together. But you want to help them recognize the difference that they're making. We talked about that. One thing to remember was empowering them, giving teens, showing them their power and their capability in their lives. Point out exactly what you saw them. I saw you go for a Twinkie in the cabinet when you got home from school, but instead you put that away and went and grabbed an apple off the counter. That's really good. Like, that's awesome. That's such a mature decision. Get with them on their level on that. I would not have made that. I would have totally grabbed that Twinkie and went with that. That's really neat that you did that. And the more that you recognize and get that positive self-talk going for those good decisions, the more they're going to have that positive self-talk for themselves. And reflecting over that reinforces that lights up that pathway, that neuron pathway that connected the thinking and feeling brain, the prefrontal and the limbic system. And then that's what's going to help them strengthen that connection between the two. But even in that, like, recognize other things that are good. If you're trying to build that relationship by spending quality time together, reach out to them, say, I really enjoyed when you let me play your video games with you tonight. This was really fun, and I had a good time connecting with you. And they might blow it off. They might be like, yeah, that was fun, and then go back to their games or whatever in that moment. But hearing that feedback really does sit with them, and they'll begin to think about that more. And that'll strengthen that connection of saying, wow, my parent really does like that. Or this adult in my life really does care about me. They really care about those times that we're engaging in that. And then once that starts getting going, that'll create that safety and that connection that then they can open up more about their feelings, and they can talk to you about their thinking processes and begin to model after you. If you're investing in their life, then they are going to come to you for things that they need. Another thing about recognizing outcomes is trying to help them to recognize their own outcomes too. At the end of the day, what are 3 things today that you feel really proud of? What's accomplishments that were important to you? What are things that stood out to you today that tell you that you're growing, that you're doing a better job? Try and get them in that growth-centered mindset. There's going to be a lot of criticisms and a lot of negative self-talk that's on their mind, because that's how teenagers are. In those years, we're very critical of ourselves. But what are some things that you saw that were accomplishments today? What are some things that are important to you? Maybe they leveled up in a video game, and like, that doesn't really matter to you, but hey, that's important to them. That makes them feel capable and empowered. Great. That's awesome. I'm really proud of you for doing that. And then, recognize other things that you may see. I know you don't feel really great about that B+ you got on your test today, but you studied for that for like 3 hours, and that was a really hard test. I know you might not think it, but that looked like a big accomplishment for me, and I'm proud of you for doing that. And the more that you solidify that accomplishment stance, the more that's going to empower them and make them feel good about those decisions and thinking through them to reinforce that connection, that frontal to limbic system brain connection. All right. Here are some resources that I think are helpful if you have teens in your life that you're working with. These are just the first resources. I might be able to get more of these if you're interested in more, but these are the first ones to go to. Dan Siegel has a great amount of books. He gets into the neuroscience of teen brain, or of just children's brains in general, like the whole brain child. It's not just specifically for teens. But I think that if you start off with some of these, you'll understand more of that neuroscience and get into, what are some of the practical things that I can do to help my teen? What's my teen going through at that time? So if you're interested in more, try out some of these books. The Connected Parent's also a great one, because all of that parenting skills and strategy starts with that connection. And then, of course, the Boundaries book. So if a teen's having a hard time with boundaries, or you need to know how to set up healthier boundaries to help your teen kind of do better thinking about themselves and not just do behavior correction the whole time, the Cloud and Townsend series, Boundaries, and then their teens one would be good resources on that. And I can bring these back up later as well if someone's curious about that. All right. I think that's everything I needed to get through. How about let's move on to some question and response. Are you there, Sandra? I can't hear you, Sandra. I don't know if that's a connection problem on my end or... I actually sent in this whole presentation was sent in. So if you want, you can either contact whoever, someone with the symposium, or you can reach out to me. Actually, I'll throw out my contact information as well, or our contact information for Care to Change. So if you want to reach out to us and get more information on these slides, either get a hold of someone with the symposium today, get a hold of Sandra. I don't know how she can get connected with those. But then that way you guys can have those slides as well.
Yes. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now, Sandra.
Okay. All right. For those of you who would like the slides, we will, I will get with the host and we will get those slides to you. We'll make sure that they're available. Okay.
Sounds good.
Jared, there's a lot of people who said they really needed this. And I'm one of those persons because I don't have any biological children, but I
Mhm.
work with children and teens at my church. And I have a lot of nieces and nephews. And so you've given me a lot of information, not only to share with members in my congregation, but also to share with my brothers and sisters. So thank you so much for that.
Mhm. Of
Yeah, Andy
course.
is Andy is putting the next question up, and
Okay. So I see this one by Carrie. She says, I have a teen I feel lives in the yellow. What are some tips for helping move her down to regulating her emotions? One of the strategies is we can take a deep breathing exercise that will um, end up practice. So there's a lot of neuroscience behind you and get your teen to start practicing doing some of those deep breaths. And what we'll do is that will literally stimulate that break impulse. We saw about the breaking that brings that down, and then they'll begin to relax and calm down. And what you want them to do is be practicing that enough that know what it feels like to be relaxed. They can feel that rest state. They feel what it's like to be back in that green. And then you create that emotional intelligence for them to say, oh, you know, I've been running at yellow this whole time, but this green zone feels really nice. And then once they get to practicing that more often and get used to green, they can be more aware of when they're in the yellow and living in that yellow too long. And then they can learn additional calming strategies, or you can get them set up with a counselor, or maybe even some school counselors know some strategies to help reduce stress. Maybe finding some activities that feel recharging for them. Now that we're getting into spring, outside's a lot nicer. Teens like to go for walks, to go outside, to just enjoy the fresh air. And then that will help her learn how to stay in that green zone a lot more. And be mindful, it's not a constant green zone. Green zone's where we want to return to, but we're going to have times where we're in the yellow throughout the day, times we're in the blue throughout the day. That's totally fine. You just want to try to make sure you come back to that green zone when you're not engaged in any specific activity. Okay. Jamie says we do the same thing. We call it POWs, bad and wows. Ooh, I never heard of that one before. I like that. Yeah. So being able to look at, what are some things that weren't so great today? What are some things that are great? And you get their mind thinking about that, thinking through what are some good decisions I made today? What am I very capable of? Sometimes I've worked with teens before where they struggle with feeling like they accomplished anything in their day. They just feel so stressed. You can even do an accomplishment journal at the end of the day. Write down everything that you feel you accomplished today, especially the teens that struggle with depression. That's a really big one where the more that they feel accomplished, the stronger they're going to make that connection and tell themselves, oh, I am empowered and I can make my decisions. Supplements that can help reduce stress for teens. So this isn't my area of specialty. I haven't really been educated in that very much. What I will say is serotonin, the neurotransmitter, is involved in a lot of these processes, particularly with depression, but also with anxiety. So make sure your teens getting an ample amount of vitamin D, not too much vitamin D in their daily dose, but just making sure that they're getting enough of that. Now that we're getting back into the summertime, they'll get a lot more of that natural vitamin D if they're outside a lot. I don't know what other supplements. That's a good question. We have on our team here at Care to Change, we have a couple of counselors who more specialize in that, more nutrition and supplement side. So I can ask that if you want to follow up with me later and get you that answer. All right, Jesse, what do you feel is a good strategy when first meeting a teen and getting to know them and build initial trust? So my thoughts are you want to begin to build that the trust by showing one that you're safe. Safety is key for new relationships with teens because they're in an environment where they're open to scrutiny, they're open to social scrutiny, they're open to them being socially in danger because that's what teens are most concerned of. Us as adults, we're more worried about kind of like the physical dangers, like making sure we have enough to eat, that when we're driving down the road there's not oncoming traffic coming at us. But for teens, their day in and out environment is social. They need to know where they fit in. They need to know that they're connected. So start with that relational piece. Start with that safety, saying, I really value this time. It's something that I've been looking forward to. And set the thing for them. Like for instance, when I start working with teens, I let them know, like, hey, so even though if you tell me something that's like a risk to you or something that I think might be hurting you, I have to tell it to your parents. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to have a conversation with you about that. And we're going to come up with a plan together of how to tell your parents about this thing that you may be engaging in that I have to share with them because it's dangerous for you. And when you set the stage and empower them for that, then that allows them to feel more safe because they get more control in that situation. So offer them some control, give them some choice. What do you want to do when we're meeting up? Do you want to go out for coffee and get some coffee? Or do you want to meet up at a bowling alley? Or do you want to meet up at, X, Y, or Z? Give them more of that power of choice on what they're doing and what they're spending on, or give them the power of choice of topic of conversation. And the more that you engage with them on their level and show that you're safe and show up in trustworthy ways, that's going to really build up that trustworthiness in the relationship that then gets them to open up a little bit more. All right. Carrie writes, I work for Taekwondo school and I watch kids walk in with total negative energy levels with smiles. Yeah, endorphins are a great way to really bring that. And exercise, really, there's a lot of positive. We talk about having exercise is important for our body, but it's also important for our brain. It changes our neurochemistry to get enough exercise through the day. This is why when kids feel depressed and they're just laying in bed all day, they feel worse because it's not doing anything for their neurochemistry to be up and moving and actually going throughout their day. So the more exercise and the more that you can get those positive bodily experiences going, my body's up, it's awake, it's moving around, it's going to create positive energy states in their mind too.
You guys are sharing some great tips,
This is
things
awesome.
that are working for you, and that's what this is all about. The symposium is us learning from each other, learning from the expert. And Jared, you have given us a lot of great information. Thank you for the resource list that you had listed. And I've read a couple of those books, the boundary books, and those are very helpful in dealing with teens. And I like what you said, get connected with them, take the time to talk to them, and make sure your level is right when you're talking to them. So that was some great tips that you gave. And I hope that all of us will use them. It sounds good now that we're all calm, but when you're hyped and in the moment and they're hyped, sometimes you forget that you need to slow it down, to calm down, and to talk to them. So Jared, you gave some good information. And sometimes we just need to reinforce this. We know that, but sometimes we need some reinforcement. So thank you for doing that.
Bethany asked a question here. I get this one all the time. When do I need to take my kid in for counseling or therapy versus when it's just a parenting moment? This is really dependent on the kid. I would say that the key pieces are when their struggles are beginning to really interrupt their life. So they can't go to school because they're so overwhelmed, they're so stressed, they're so emotionally dysregulated. They can't do their daily tasks. Like they can't come out of their room. They're just so shut off and shut away. They have no time with friends. One of the most important things with teens is that they have those friends, those social relationships with others, with peers their age. If they have absolutely no friends and they have no desire to make friends, that's a good indicator that, okay, something's going on that probably needs some attention. If you have a hard time connecting with your teen, that's also a reason to go into counseling. It's not a bad thing. In fact, it's a really good thing as a parent to say, I want to brush up on my parenting skills. I want to know a better way to help connect with my teen. And you can do that either with your teen in the room, do some like kind of family therapy skills, or you can come in on your own. Like I teach a lot of parents on parenting skills. I think that's really helpful for them. So it really depends on your teen. The teens that you work with, you're going to know what their normal is and what their not normal is. But if you begin to see anything that's really out of the ordinary, stuff that stands out on a consistent basis, it's not just like a one-time thing. That's a good indicator that, okay, maybe we need to sit you down with a counselor and start talking to someone about that.
You guys, we have 2 minutes. So if you have any other questions that you would like to ask Jared, now's the time to put them in the chat.
As we're waiting on questions, I do have one quick thing to share. A good thing to ask yourself, how do I help parent my teen with this? Is how did your parents or how did those adults in your life who poured into you, how did they help you? And I don't mean that by just saying, oh, borrow their strategies, but the way that you learned from the adults in your life is going to determine how you are going to teach your child. You didn't go any further than your adult, parent or whoever in your life had gone themselves, because you can't take anyone further than you have yourself. And if the adults who spoke into your life didn't quite go as far as they needed to be able to pour into you as a teenager, then you likely haven't gone far enough to do the same for your teen. Now, maybe you have. I mean, you do stuff like this, coming to the symposium, and you get all these skills and you go further to help them. But really check on what your adult relationships were like when you were a teen and how far that took you, so you can get a good gauge of where you're at right now.
Jared, we want to thank you so much for giving us all of these great tips. I want to thank everyone for joining us today in this session of Beyond Boundaries, and how to listen to your teens, and how to look at your teens and look at yourself. So this was a 2-for-1, if I might put that in. But hope you guys enjoy the rest of the day. We're ending our session, and I hope you have a great day and enjoy the rest of the sessions. Once again, thank you all.
Thank you, guys.